Okay. We don't really have an intro for Vikes of the Round Table, which is what this is called. Uh, so this is Vikes of the Round Table. Today we're going to be discussing the 2019 NFL Draft from the perspective of the Minnesota Vikings. Joining me today is Connor Wickland.
Hi, Kirby. Nice to be
Con-
talking to you again.
yeah, Connor is one of our editors on Purple PTSD and Vikings territory, and also joining me is Ian Paraguay, like the country.
Like the country. Are we gonna say that every time, Kirby?
It's gonna be every time. It's gonna be every single time. Ian is another contributor on Purple PTSD. Yeah, so let's get right into it. Let's start off with the big one, the big pick of the draft, the first round pick, Garrett Bradbury, the center out of NC State. I'll just throw it right over to Connor right away, and he can kind of start off talking about Bradbury.
Yeah, so I know a lot of people were excited that we picked up an offensive lineman because that was clearly the number one need that we had on the team. So I think you could have mentioned any name on there and people would have been excited. Personally, I wasn't too happy immediately after declaring the pick because I was just wondering about the positional value of having a center. I was definitely more a fan of taking a left tackle. I'm not a scout, so I liked Andre Dillard because he had the most pass protecting experience. That's what matters most for me when I look at left tackles. But I think the positional value of having a left tackle, and then of course you'd move Reef inside, maybe outweighs the fact of having a center. But I know you can't get mad at having an offensive lineman in the first round.
Yeah, and
I
yeah,
oh, go
sorry.
ahead, Kirby.
No, the last time we did this, I kind of passed it back and forth, but I'll just let you go if you want to just hop in.
Okay. Yeah. So I just think that I kind of agree with what Connor said. There's that positional value there. I may have gone the direction of Andre Dillard too, but when you look at it from a different perspective of the team wanting to move Elfline to left guard rather than moving Reef to left guard, which is probably what would have happened if you're drafting Andre Dillard. I think that move makes more sense when you look at it from that perspective. But to me, it kind of just felt like more of a draft pick for right now instead of a draft pick for the future, which I think Andre Dillard would have been more looking towards the next 10 years rather than the next four.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I would have meant. Oh,
oh,
go ahead, Kirby.
I was just gonna say that Ian and I talked about this on the very quick reaction to round one, Vikings on the clock. We talked about how this is maybe a pick for now and not a pick for the future, and it just seems like Rick's kind of protecting himself, which I'm happy with the pick of Bradbury still, because obviously I think he's a very good offensive lineman and might be able to be the center for a long time. But it just yeah, it feels like a weird thing where they're thinking of the next couple of years and not like 3 to 5 years down the line, or even 6 to 7 years, which is like it's good in the sense that they want to win now, but it's bad in the sense that if they don't win now, um, they've kind of handicapped themselves a little bit.
I also think they've really, really stressed scheme fit, and Andre Dillard wasn't as much of a scheme fit as Bradbury is in this outside zone scheme. So I really think that played a large part as well in going Bradbury. I think that it would have been nice to see both Bradbury and someone like Lindstrom on the board so we could have seen who they preferred out of those two. Because I personally had Lindstrom rated a little bit higher. But I think Bradbury overall, I don't think, I'm sure there are people that are, but I don't think you can be upset with it. You could be, I don't know how I feel about it, but I don't think you're overly upset because, like Connor said, we're addressing the offensive line.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of it also has to do with the run game. I think there were plenty of questions with Andre Dillard's game and how he addresses the run game, which again, personally, if I'm looking at left tackle prospects, I don't really care about how they do in the run game. I just care only about pass blocking because, if you think about how we value edge rushers, no one cares about an edge rusher's ability to drop back in coverage or cover the run. It's pretty much only pass rush. So on the other side, you kind of want a guy who's only going to block proficiently in passing. That's pretty much your number one priority. But yeah, anyways, I think the value of going center and then moving elf line to guard is that you'll have a lot more opportunities for establishing the run game, which we saw with Zimmer last year. He really likes that. But even if we shorten the time frames of like when now, I think Bradbury is pretty much he helps out this year because we're going to keep Riley Reef at left tackle and then pretty much address it later. But yeah, even if you're just looking at over the length of the 4-year contract, I think there's a lot more value in selecting a left tackle, even if we're not looking at who's going to be on the team in 10 years. I think if you're just looking at over the length of that contract, there's so much millions of dollars you save by going left tackle and then signing a center at market value, then going center and signing a left tackle at market value. That even in years 2, 3, and 4, I think it hurts. So I think two things of note is this kind of reinforces the idea that we're kind of pretty much this is an all-in year. Cousins contract also with that. These next 2 years are kind of like all-in years, and then establishing the run game in those 2 years is where I see this pick going.
I will add a quick caveat. I haven't done a lot, but the very little I have scouted for the 2020 draft, it's very tackle heavy. The tackles are really, really good in the 2020 draft. That I have watched. So that could have played a part too in going Bradbury in this draft and seeing what kind of tackles will be available in next year's draft. So that's another option of what could be the reasoning behind going someone that perfectly fits the scheme versus someone that doesn't necessarily. And especially because you don't know what you would do with Reef. But personally, I just can't see Reef being on this team after this year, the way his contract is structured, unless there's a massive restructure or pay cut. And kind of what you went off of, Connor, I think you could argue that the first 4 picks address the run game. So that's obviously something that they were really wanting to stress.
Yeah, 100%. I think if we did go left tackle, I think there would be plenty of arguments to then go center or guard in the second round, and then you have a transition plan for Reef to maybe start week 1, and then as the rookie develops, you put the rookie in at left tackle. So I think maybe we can get into this next. Them targeting Irv Smith Jr. in round 2 maybe made them say, okay, we're just going to get the guard now, and then we're going to get more pass catching help in the second round, and then we can address left tackle in the future, because I don't think you necessarily are targeting left tackles in rounds 2, 3, 4, to get them to start week 1. If you're going to do that, you want to take your guy that you have at the top of your board in round 1.
And I think in round 1 with Lindstrom and Williams going before them, I think there was some of that worry like the year before. Maybe there's going to be another run. So I think that could have played a role too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A lot of talk at the time and before the draft was that if at 18 so many people are available, which there was a lot of people available who we thought were well, not we in general, but we on Vikings on the Clock, me and Kevin especially, thought were worthy of either the 18th or a little bit farther back, and we were kind of surprised that we didn't see a trade down for some of these guys, because one of the guys that I was harping on in the Slack when the thing was happening was Jawan Taylor didn't get picked until the 35th pick, and I was surprised. I was surprised that they didn't move down to get him. Of course, I don't know about the scheme fit with Taylor, and I know there was some concerns with his injury at the end of this last season. He didn't participate in the combine or anything, but I don't know. I was surprised. They must have really liked Bradbury to grab him at 18, or maybe, like Ian said, they thought there was going to be a run, and they didn't want to risk moving back and missing out on their guy at 18.
I think the problem with Jawan Taylor too is I saw him strictly as a right tackle, so that would entail quite a bit of moving around on the offensive line. which I don't see them as wanting to do. They're already making one move with Elfline to guard, and I don't think they wanted to move O'Neal to left tackle, then Reef to guard, and then put the rookie at right tackle. Like, that's a lot of movement.
It is a lot of movement, and especially following a year where you took a veteran and you tried to move him inside, who had played tackle his whole career, and it didn't work out for you. It's much easier, I guess, to slot Elfline over into a position he's played before and within the last 5 years even, than to take Riley Reef and try to say, well, you're going to play guard now when you've been playing tackle for pretty much your whole professional career.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just Jawan Taylor. I mean, if you look at all of the tackles that were taken between the Vikings' first second-round pick, we also had Andre Dillard, as I mentioned, I liked, but we also had Titus Howard, Caleb McGarry went in the first round. Extending the second round, you have Jawan Taylor, Greg Little, Cody Ford, Dalton Reisner. So I feel like if they wanted to go left tackle, like if they valued that position going forward long term, surely they could have found one of those guys that the scouts liked, scheme fit, everything else. So I think the fact that they didn't trade down, that they selected Bradbury there instead of any tackle pretty much besides Jonah Williams, because he was already off the board at 11. I think it's pretty clear that they wanted to stay on the interior, and I thought Bradbury was, maybe not the highest upside pick, but definitely the safest pick. Because if you're going to choose a guard that high, an interior guy, so guard or center, if you're going to take him that high, you want to make sure he's at least average to above average. Otherwise, what's the point?
And he has a high floor. I don't think, you're going to be worried about him failing in a couple of years either. But of those guys that you listed too, I think most of them were right tackles. You look at Cody Ford, you look at Dalton Reisner, other than Greg Little and Andre Dillard were pretty much the only true left tackles there. And even McGarry is more on the right side. And so you're looking at a lot of shuffling there.
Yeah, okay, let's move on to the Irv Smith Jr. pick, what the implications of all that are, because I think that this is an interesting discussion to have. I know I got text messages from people who are close to me that were confused about it. They were like, well, what does this mean for Rudy? Does this mean Rudy's definitely gone? And I think that's an interesting discussion to have. So I'll throw it over to Ian first to kind of start into that.
I think we could move away from Rudy. I think we couldn't. I think, looking at Kubiak especially, he really likes his 2 tight end sets. And when you're looking at the other tight ends on the roster, both Morgan and Rudy's contracts are up after the season. So it's really a matter of probably choosing Rudy or Morgan, I think, at this point. I think the most interesting aspect of it is the fact that Rudy and his agent have been so vocal about wanting an extension and to lower his cap hit, and we just haven't even acknowledged the fact that they're doing that. That seems odd to me. But I think you're either moving on from Rudy after this season or probably this season. I think, looking at it though, I don't think it makes sense to make that trade now. If you're making that trade during the draft or before the draft, that makes sense. But we're, like we've mentioned, even with the Bradbury pick, we seem to be more in a win now mode, and you don't get rid of one of your tight ends to do that. One of your main offensive weapons, I think.
Yeah, I don't buy the talk that Kyle Rudolph is going to be gone. I think, as you mentioned, getting 2 tight end sets, even just so much as helping that offensive line, because I think even with all the additions, there will still be concerns about whether they're good enough to get us to the playoffs. So having 2 tight ends, having 2 bigger bodies in next to the offensive line instead of 3 wide receivers out wide can help them tremendously, especially in the passing game. And setting up play action. You could have both Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph lined up on the line, have one of them block, have one of them go out on a route, fake it to their running back, and throw it out. I think that'll help in short yardage situations like 3rd and shorts where we really struggled last year. So I think there's a lot of reasons why you could have Rudolph and Smith on the same offense. And then, yeah, like you said, everything that we've done pretty much points to this is our window. We want to win now. So I don't see why we'd be trading Rudolph, who's only has 1 year left on his deal. So I don't think you could even get a round 2 or round 3 for him why would we do that for a late round pick in 2020? I don't buy it.
Yeah, and what was I gonna add? I was gonna say, what do you guys think of the actual pick itself of Irv Smith? You know, we talk about the implications of it for Rudolph and the move tight end aspect. What do you think of Irv Smith as a pick? Because I had him marked. I first wrote about him with one of the first stories I did on the national championship game, and I said this is a guy that Vikings fans need to keep an eye on. And check out, because I think this is a move that definitely could happen. So what do you think of Irv Smith as a player?
I'll hand it to you, Connor.
So I was surprised, actually. The morning before the second round started, I put out a hot take on Twitter that said I don't want to see a tight end anytime soon, because last year we ran a lot of 11 personnel. So if we kept Rudolph, we'd keep him in there. And then the real liability, I thought, was at wide receiver 3, because I just don't think Laquan Treadwell, we've seen enough of him. He just can't get open. I think if you're going to look at where you can improving the wide receiver 3 spot was more valuable than the tight end 2 spot, because we play it like 4 to 6 times more. So just in terms of how many snaps you'll get, I prefer to wide receiver 3. I still think I do. But if you look at how the draft went, I mean, the Vikings reportedly got a lot of offers to trade out of 50 and back and collect more draft capital, which they ended up doing in round 3. So they valued that. But they instead decided to stay put and select Irv Smith Jr. So I think internally, maybe they value him more. How should I say this? In the consensus boards, we saw a lot of the Iowa tight ends, T.J. Hawkinson, Noah Fant, and then kind of a drop off, and then Irv Smith was like the top of the next tier. But based on how they stayed put and how they selected him and how they it looked like pretty much they were targeting him over wide receiver 3 or over like defensive help. I think they maybe valued him internally in that top tier, like in a group of 3, interchangeable with Noah Fant. And I mean, there's plenty of pre-draft articles about why we should draft Noah Fant in the first round. So I think if you have a guy who you consider on that same tier available in the second round, I think that's why they did it. So I just think I was surprised when it happened, but if you look at how they value it, I think they like him a lot more than the media does.
I think I'm going to agree and disagree. I agree that wide receiver 3 probably was more of a pressing need than a tight end 2, but with the player of Irv Smith, I think that he can be your wide receiver 3. You look at his route running and his catch and his yak ability, he can be that guy that not only has to line up along the line, but can be almost a slot receiver-esque kind of tight end. So I think you are looking at a guy that can be moved around and be that third weapon that's out there, even when Rudolph or Morgan is also on the field. I think that, he is that guy that's going to be that person that takes coverages away from Diggs and Thielen. He is that much of a threat. And so I see what you're saying with the wide receiver 3 being more important, but I think that both the tight end need and the wide receiver 3 need were kind of addressed with Irv Smith.
Do you guys think? Sorry, this is just a thought that struck me. Do you guys think there's a possibility that, we get into games and we're running the ball well? If it all goes well, we're running the ball well and running the ball with some nice power. Do you think there's a possibility that we run a 3 tight end set with Smith, Rudolph, and then either Morgan or even Tyler Conklin, depending, and then we're able to gash people by, not only running the ball, but all of a sudden turning around and play actioning out of a 3 tight end set, and, them not being able to account for those bigger bodies. Sorry, it was just a thought that I had that it was very sexy in my mind to have 3 tight ends and be able to run really well out of it and then play action off of it and have 3, Rudolph and Smith are supposed to be excellent receiving tight ends, and then maybe even Tyler Conklin and David Morgan, who surprise you a little bit by how well they can catch the ball and move a little bit.
I think that is an awesome idea, but I think you could even add CJ Ham to that list of players that you can add to the running game. I think you could even line up behind the quarterback. You line up Cook, Ham and Irv Smith and have all three of them back there and confuse the hell out of defenses. I think you're looking at a lot of different things that you can do with Irv Smith. And sorry, I don't see Conklin making the roster.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to agree with you. I think I was in my head, I was trying to draw it out how we would use 3 tight ends, and I was like, well, Morgan's really good at run blocking. Why don't we just move him to fullback? And then I remembered we have a fullback. His name is CJ Ham. So I think they could be really good with CJ Ham. But I only see that really working in like short yardage, goal line, third down situations, and that's really dependent on like executing on play action to try and confuse them, because I still feel like their outrunning abilities you have in Diggs and Thielen, they can just do a quick little spurt and get open. I don't really see the need to take them off the field, honestly, but yeah, that's my thought with that.
All right, so we all agree that Smith was a good pick for the value, but I think the next round is the one that got really interesting and got really it kind of divided people among, either how much they knew about the game or how much they were really bought into the Rick Spielman idea, because he traded down in the third round. Was it
4 times?
4 times in just the third. And
Yep,
then he takes Alexander Madison out of Boise State, a running back, and I'll throw it back over to you guys before I give my thoughts on Madison, because I definitely have feelings about him.
I think you're looking at a couple of things with Madison. I think, like we spoke about earlier, they are clearly putting an emphasis on the run game. Rick Spielman also has an affinity for taking running backs on day 2 of the draft. He really likes doing that. I don't see the value there entirely, but I think you're also, with that kind of pick, you're clearly a little worried about Dalvin Cook's health and him staying healthy for the entire season. I don't think Madison can be that running back 1 kind of player consistently, but I think he will do in a pinch. As well as, I didn't know a whole heck of a lot about Madison when we made the pick, but after watching some tape since we made that pick, you look at that, he is a freight train. He really is. Like, he bulldozes people over. So having that kind of thunder and lightning aspect of him and Cook is really intriguing.
Yeah, I'm gonna divert from the norm. I'm gonna say, when this pick was made, this is probably the most happy I was at pick, because we just
Really?
concerns in round 1. I wanted Dillard. We went Bradbury. It's like, okay, it kind of makes sense. Round 2, I wanted a receiver. We went Irv Smith. I was like, okay, kind of makes sense. But this one, I think you trade down a lot. I don't think you need to even watch tape to understand how much of a bowling ball he is. Let me just read out his draft profile. He's 5'11" and 221 pounds. I mean, just weight alone and force, you can kind of tell this is a guy who makes his money just plowing into people, which is what we need. Dalvin Cook is a smaller, shifty running back. He has injury concerns, as you said. But even still, like, every running back in the NFL is a running back by committee, pretty much, or it should be, just because those guys get so much wear and getting hit. So I think you can have Cook, pull him out, get this guy in. Just throw him into the defense. We have a hole after Latavius Murray left. I just think it all makes sense. And of course, Zimmer loves to run game. He's going to get him in there. And I don't think so as you said, trade back. I think we traded back 4 times, but we actually got something like 6 picks out of it, just because they're all low round picks. So you get all those additional players in as camp bodies, and you hope that they develop and emerge. And I'm generally in favor of trading back, even though I know people got mad because they wanted to see what pick we were doing. I think just amassing guys and getting those lottery tickets, if even one of them pays off out of the like 6 or whatever that we got, I think that's worth it. And then you get a running back in the 3rd round. I don't think that's crazy. Reach. I just remember back to this kind of draft Twitter hating running backs kind of happened when Alvin Kamara came out in the 3rd round, and then everyone was like, oh, why are you taking, like Leonard Fournette in the 1st? But Kamara went at the beginning of the 3rd round, and he's kind of like the example of like, oh, you can just wait and find a random dude and he'll fill in just fine. He went long before Madison happened. So I think end of 3rd, and then going on down, I think if you pick a running back that you like, that fits what you need him to do, I think that's more than enough value to spend a pick on it.
And I see what you're saying there as far as just the position. I hadn't watched a lot of tape on him, but I'd watched a little, and I definitely had a lower round grade on him than just a third round or even a fourth round because that pick was basically a fourth rounder. I did have a late fifth round grade on him, so I think it was a little bit of a reach, but I understand it because he is the exact opposite of Dalvin Cook. I remember even seeing a play where he went right up the middle and all four defensive linemen converged on him and he just went through them. And I have no idea how he got out of that, but it was quite impressive.
Yeah, and again, as I said earlier, one of the biggest drop-offs from 2017 to 2018 was how we did in third down situations. We went from one of the league's best to one of the league's worst. Just getting a guy in there who can just pummel guys at the line, get us a first down. That's what you need.
Yeah, I'll say that. I do thinking about it more, and like after the initial thing, I did feel a lot better about the pick. And actually, after the next pick, I did feel a lot better, even because we got with our next pick, we picked up Drew Samia. I'm assuming I'm saying his name close to right. But we picked up the lineman that I thought we were going to pick in the third round, and I was really upset about this pick. That's why I said I had feelings, because I was pissed at Rick. I was like, this is the stupidest. Like, why did you get this guy? And then I thought about it a little bit because I just thought they were replacing Murray apparently, and I was like, I don't want another. Not that I didn't love Latavius Murray, like I was just kind of ready for something different, and then I went and I watched Madison, and I was like, this is different. This is much better because Murray, he can go through people and he can, make it happen. But he's so up and down. And he's so tall that like in those short yardage situations, unless he's falling forward, he's not going to get you the yard or two that you need. Madison's like lower to the ground and he just runs through people. So like you guys said, there was a play last season that I will stick in my mind forever because it was when we played Chicago, the first game we played in Chicago, and it was third and I think inches or half yard or whatever. And we're on the 40, I think it's like the 45, like they're 45. So we're driving, we're going to make something happen. And it's third and inches, and we run Dalvin Cook to the left side or wherever. We run him right at Khalil Mack, and he meets Khalil Mack at the line of scrimmage, and we don't get any more than that. And that is the play that I think Madison is going to come in, and he's going to make that play happen, because even if he meets a Khalil Mack, there are very few people that he's going to meet and then go backwards on. So on this pick, I went from being so annoyed with Rick. I was so, just peeved off. And then like I flipped after I watched a little bit of the tape a little bit more tape on the guy. And I was like, okay, he can run through people and he can get us those short yardage, but also some of his highlights, he looks much faster than like, he looks like he plays a little faster than he measures in. So in the end, I love the pick. Which goes to show that your feelings on draft day aren't always valid.
And I think, to add to liking the pick, you get the next pick. Like, just switch them. If I think if you take Samia in the third and you take Madison in the fourth, like, people aren't as pissed. And so in your head, just switch them and it's fine.
Exactly.
All right.
Let's go right into Samia.
Yeah.
I haven't watched much on this guy. I've heard tons of different opinions, everything from he's a solid fourth rounder to like, oh, does he make this, like the starting roster? What do you guys think on his upside 2019 specifically?
I think in 2019 he's not quite the starter. I think he could push Elfline for a starting left guard spot, depending on how, if they want to even move him to the left side. I don't think he's going to push Klein on the right side. So it really depends what side you see him at. But I think he can push for a starting job. I don't think it'll necessarily happen this season. If it does, it's probably due to, knock on wood, injury that happened on the line. But I think he could fill in a lot better than, say, an Isadora.
Yeah, I think I mean I definitely see him as a backup. And unlike Ian, I saw him pushing Klein for a spot before Elflein, but also I'm not sure about the sides thing. I would have to think about that a lot. But I see him as a good backup, and he's going to get a lot of seasoning. And I thought that there's a good chance by the end of the year that he is starting, either through hopefully not injury, or the fact that I have the pessimistic view that Josh Klein is not going to work out, quite possibly, just because we've seen the last couple of years he's been down in ratings and everything, and I'm not really sure how Klein is going to work out, is essentially what that boils down to, because for all I know, he's going to Alex Boone and just not do anything. I hope he does well, but yeah, I see him as a backup with potentially starting this year.
I think, when you look at someone like Klein, you just have to hope he comes back from the injury too. Because you look at his 2 previous years before last year, and he was a very solid guard. Like, he was top half of the league guard. And you just have to hope that he comes back from that shoulder injury. And if he does, I think you got to steal at his price tag. But I think, going on the fact of Klein starting this year, it's frustrating, but this front office and coaching staff has an affinity to, I believe, look at the price tag sometimes and say we're kind of paying this guy to start right now, and so that they put him there to start. That's was my biggest frustration last year. When you look at a guy like Brett Jones, like, he started the first 4 games, I think, and he did a lot better than Remmers did the rest of the season, but they refused to put Brett Jones back in. So I think they looked at that price tag and determined it off of that, which I hate. But
yeah, looking at Klein's contract, I think just in the way they valued him going into free agency, I think he's definitely the starter this year. And next year, most of his contract is still guaranteed. I think something around the ballpark of $6 million, and you only get $1 million back if he's cut or traded. So I think he's pretty. I mean, as you said, injury or in case he's like horrendous, I think he's pretty safe to start for the next 2 years. Just based on how they value him. So I don't really see Samia coming in, but I mean, if he's good enough, like, rookie contracts are what they are, that doesn't necessarily mean that's how you value him. So I could see him starting, but if he is starting by year 2, that's kind of a bust on Klein's part. You'd be paying him a lot to be the backup guard.
That's why I think you look at him to push Elflein, because right now, what other left guard do you have really on the roster? I don't think you really have any other left guards on the roster. So I think you try to put Samia on the left, and see how he does there. If he completely fails at the left side, definitely switch him back. But I think that's where they're going to start in training camp, is with him on the left side.
Yeah, and Elflein's contract is a little more palatable. He's still on, I believe, his rookie deal from when he was a 3rd-round pick. And he has experience at center. We're obviously trusting him to move to guard. I think even if someone takes his starting spot, you can still justify that contract and his experience and be like, okay, he's the number 2 option at left guard, center, and right guard. So if any of those 3 get injured, he's flexible and can slot right in there. I still think he has plenty of value as a backup. Again, disappointing because he was the starter, and you kind of expect these young guys to move up in their skill instead of getting replaced right away. But at the end of the day, I think, if that's the plan, I don't have a problem with that.
But I think you have to take his injury into account too. Sure. He several injuries at that.
Sure.
I was going to say,
he heals and gets better.
Yeah. I was going to say, since we have so many later round picks, instead of going over each one individually, maybe we each pick our favorite one of the later round picks.
Yeah, we can. I do just want to mention the next pick, because Rick Spielman, I am upset with you that you didn't move up. You didn't move up and get Blake Cashman, and I'm upset about that.
He said in his post-draft conference that he didn't specifically say for Blake Cashman, but he said in his post-draft conference that he tried to move up and failed, and wasn't able to for one player. And I'm like 99% sure that was for Cashman. So I think he tried. I just think it didn't work out.
That's fair. I never thought, a few years ago, I never thought that the New York Jets would be one of my most hated teams in the league.
There's this weird hatred
Yeah.
on both sides.
We stole one of their linebackers, so I guess they can steal one of ours. It's only fair.
He made a
And they
decision.
Bar for Cashman.
Man, and it's all the free agents. I feel like every free agent it said we were interested in. It also said the Jets were interested in this offseason.
I never thought, AFC East, absolutely no reason for me to dislike the Jets. And then they get upset at us because Kirk Cousins decides to sign with us for less money, and then Anthony Barr leaves them at the altar and to come back to us, and then they just continually, they talk shit at us for the whole time. The New York Post is just posting articles hating on the Vikings and hating on Kirk Cousins and now Anthony Barr. And then they go and they be petty by taking Blake Cashman from me. What is that?
And Trevor Siemian. We tried to re-sign him. They signed him.
Well, Simeon is.
Wasn't there another lineman that they got that we were interested in? I think too.
Dozier, was that?
We signed.
Dozier. We got.
We signed Dozier.
Was it? Did they get Wisniewski or whatever?
Well, they signed. They signed Tom Compton, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, I think they did.
They can have.
Ooh, Tom Compton.
All right, we'll move past that and we'll talk about everybody
kind of quick going off of that. It does really suck. People are really frustrated with all the move downs, but I think if we would have been able to use even more of that capital to move up for Cashman, I think people wouldn't have cared at all.
No, I don't think they would have. I think there would have been a lot of people who were super happy because Blake Cashman's local. Missed opportunity, but what you gonna do? So let's all select.
It sounded like he tried. So who knows? Because you never know what's going on in that draft room. So the fact that he even said that in his post-draft press conference shows me that he was trying to be like, guys, I tried.
I feel like I did it. I did my best. I think we should trade Barr for Cashman, straight up. Just kidding.
I am not on that train. Count me out.
Neither am I. Maybe 3 years from now when Cashman's a stud and Barr is on the end of his towards the tail end of his contract.
I'm going to say the same things I said when Barr was rumored to go to the Jets. They're going to ruin Cashman. And I don't want them to, but they're going to.
The best we can hope for is he gets cut and we can pick him up. Okay. Yeah, you guys just want to go down and select someone to talk about each. I'll say that was mine. That was mine. Talking about the Cashman pick for getting Cameron Smith instead of Blake Cashman. I don't know anything about Smith. I hope he works out. That's all I gotta say about him.
I see him as a brother's replacement, to be honest.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit with Luke Brown on Twitter, where he was kind of frustrated that Cameron Smith wasn't the raw athletic talent. But my view on it was we already have Barr, we already have Kendricks. We just need a solid guy, and they're both on long-term deals. We just need a solid guy who can purely be depth. And I think just the fact that he was exactly that solid at USC, you saw him against pretty good competition. I don't think you need to take a risk there getting a boomer bust prospect. I think he does what we want him to do. He's just a solid backup linebacker who can come in if a guy's injured for a drive or two.
My biggest problem with it, I think, is you have Gideon, you have Wilson, you have Devontae Downs. You have all those guys. I didn't see any need at linebacker. I think we could have gone through this entire draft and not gotten linebacker, and I would have been like, yay, we didn't go linebacker. So I don't get it. Nothing against Cameron Smith. It's just I think he's gonna, as a 5th round pick, gonna have a really hard time making the roster.
I think he's also I think the comparison is going to be there. His whole time in Minnesota, in a lot of fans' minds, is going to be to Cashman. And if Cashman, doesn't do well in New York, maybe Cameron Smith will turn out to be will benefit from that. But if Cashman goes and he uses his athleticism and becomes, this doesn't even have to do well, just has to become a starter, or doesn't have to do exceptionally well, just has to go and become a starter. And everybody will hate Cameron Smith, and it's not Cameron Smith's fault at all.
No.
Yeah.
All right, Connor, is there a later pick that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so, speaking of Smith, I said we kind of aim for him to want to be depth, and I feel that way about a lot of these guys, which is typical for day 3 picks. Like you look at Marcus Epps, I think he's just a backup to Anthony Harris, Chris Boyd. Same thing with the cornerbacks. But one that really stuck out to me was Armin Watts, DT out of Arkansas. It's partially just because of my fear. I don't know if the 3-tech position is as solid as we think it is. I don't know if I trust Shamar Stephen to be the starter for a full season, and rotation is important. So I think this is, if you're talking about a solid guy you want depth versus a boom or bust prospect who could come in and see playing time, I think Armin Watts does that. And I think if we had a rotation between him, also like Jalen Holmes is kind of like an undersized, more pass rusher type guy. I think he's one to keep an eye on for the next couple of years.
I think, when I was looking at the 3-technique need, quote unquote, in the draft before the draft started, I was the one arguing, I think you either try to go get a starter in the first couple rounds, or I don't see it as a need, because I think we have that depth there. You look at not only Shamar Stephen, but we have Jalen Holmes, we have Fadio Denigbo, we have Jaleel Johnson. Like, all those guys can play the interior, so I'm not worried about depth at that position as much. So I didn't necessarily see the value, but I think, I had a 5th round grade on him, so to get him at the end of the 6th is still quite a bit of value there. So I like it, but again, I think he is going to have one of those guys has got to go. I don't think one of those guys makes a 53. So who that's going to be is going to be fun to watch in training camp.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about that as I do with wide receivers, where you just got a bunch of bodies. You hope one of them is good enough to take a starting spot, but they're all such low cost, low risk guys. If you end up cutting up, like, I don't know, even half of them, you're fine. I just think so. I mean, we could be coming back here in like September, October, and he's not even on the team. But I still think he's a guy to keep a watch on just in case.
Yeah, I think one of the things I saw about Watts is like he's just one of the big pluses that he's an incredibly hard worker, and he really wants to try to make himself into a better player. Like he and like I think. Especially in these later rounds, I think that's a thing that you're looking for in guys is you look for guys, you look for their tools, but you look for their high character and the fact that they're going to come in, they're going to work every single day, because like it's entirely possible that he doesn't make the roster or he ends up on the practice squad for the first half of the season. But if he keeps grinding and keeps improving to be better, those are the guys that end up making it a long time in the league, even if they don't become a starter or become a star. Because they're willing to put in the work and they're willing to put in the work ethic. Also, side note on this, I pulled up his draft profile on the NFL.com for his combine, and his NFL comparison is Shamar Stephen.
Okay then.
So I'm gonna potentially cheat a little bit. I'm gonna talk a little bit about 2. And the first one I'm going to talk about, since you brought up you thinking wide receiver 3 is a need, I really like the Dylan Mitchell pick. I think that he is someone that definitely can battle for that wide receiver 3 position there. And if you look at all the 5th through 7th round picks that we had, I think he's the one that's going to potentially have the biggest impact on the season this year. He's really fast. He can catch the ball. His route running does need some work. But I think, you have the 2 best route runners in the league to teach him too. So I think you look at Dylan Mitchell as someone that can take the lid off the offense too. And side note, he does also have some return ability too. So that could be something that that's a position that we needed to fill when Marcus Sherrills left. So I think that could be part of his value as well. And then switching a little bit to the other side of the ball, I really like the Chris Boyd pick too. I think that cornerback was a bigger need than a lot of people were giving it credit for, with Mackenzie Alexander and Trey Waynes both on expiring contracts here. And whether you want to keep them or not, I highly doubt you can keep both. And if you do, then Xavier Rhodes is probably gone. So I think you needed someone that was on another rookie contract there to battle for a spot. And I had a really high grade on Chris Boyd. I had a early fourth grade on him, and he's someone that he gets really handsy, and that's probably his biggest knock. But that was Xavier Rhodes' biggest knock coming out of college too. So I think that that's something that we can definitely work with. I think you also see again side value there of him growing up with Holton Hill and as someone that has kept clean off the field his entire college career, as someone that maybe can, as Holton Hill's friend, can keep him clean after what we've dealt with him.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I don't really have any opinions on Mitchell versus Johnson or anything, but like as I said, I want one of those guys to come up. Do you know more specifically? Do you know more specifically if any of these guys focus outside? Or are they slot guys? What are you thinking for Mitchell and Johnson?
Chris Boyd, I think, is an outside corner, which is what I think we needed more than a slot corner. I think that Mitchell could be anywhere. I think he is someone that can work both. I think you probably start him at slot just because I think there's more of a vacancy there, even though Thielen excels in the slot. But he could also be, with his straight line speed, could be an outside receiver as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think if this is me being a little picky now, because I think we have so many wide receivers, and the main hope should just be that one of them develops into starter quality, which there's so many lottery tickets, but there's no guarantee on any of them. But if I am to be picky, I think I want an outside guy just for the fact that you mentioned you can move Thielen into the slot. I think he's much better slot receiver. I think he's great either way, but I think giving him the whole middle of the field to work with, especially with like the best part of his game is arguably his route running. It would be really exciting to see a third receiver take the outside, let him dedicate his workload to the slot.
I think you could make
the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I've been talking too much.
I was just gonna make the joke that I think Connor just said the most controversial thing to ever be said on a Vikings podcast. Calling Adam Thielen great is controversial.
I mean, I do own a Diggs jersey, so I'm slandering my boy a little bit by not calling him number one.
But I think you look at both Diggs and Thielen, and you see that they can both be outside or in the slot. So they clearly value the flexibility of, the mismatch ability of both of them, putting either one on a slot corner and making them go to the outside could be really frustrating for a defense. So I think that you look at that dual ability, and I think that you can see that in Dillon Mitchell too.
It's good to hear.
All right. Let's see. What do we got next? Let's talk about Jake Browning.
Do we have to?
We can.
I'd love to. I actually like Jake Browning.
Really?
I'll let Connor lead it since he's the one who seems to.
So I think we're gonna get to this later, but I think it is curious that we chose a long snapper over him. I think some of the reporting I've seen was that a bunch of teams were moving to move up to get that long snapper. So I think the plan was to get Browning in 7th and sign the long snapper as an undrafted free agent. There was more interest in the long snapper than there was in Browning, so they reversed it. Or at least they thought they could make a more competitive offer to Browning in free agency after the draft. And then you get the fact that Jake Browning got a lot of money for an undrafted free agent. I think he got $140,000 fully guaranteed, which is actually more guaranteed than we gave to Sean Mannion, and is more and Slaughter doesn't have any guarantees. So he's currently, if you're looking at guaranteed money, Browning in terms of contract is already the QB2. And I think he's obviously the youngest. He's the rookie. I think he has a legitimate shot to push for that quarterback 2 spot. I think a couple of years ago when we brought in Slaughter, it was the idea that he would develop into the backup quarterback, but that hasn't really happened. We saw a lot of activity from the GMs looking at quarterbacks and kind of keeping Slaughter at 3, hoping he develops in 2020, but we need a backup right now. So you bring in Sean Mannion. I don't think the interview went well because we didn't immediately sign him. We looked at AAF guys. We looked at other backup guys. Some of them, originally we wanted to go after Simeon, but he took too big of a contract from the Jets. So it seemed from the very outset of when we signed Mannion, it was kind of like a disappointment in the front office. Like, this isn't the guy we targeted, but we need a guy to play backup quarterback. So I think landing Browning, giving him a lot of money upfront guaranteed, really lets him know and let us know that I think he's a legit shot to get the QB2 slot. I think we have put a lot of resources already in roster spot into Sloter. I think they still like him, even though he's a developmental prospect. So I think if I had to predict today what happens by season start, I think Mannion gets cut. Browning is the QB2, Sloter is 3, and then eventually once Sloter gets up to speed, probably next year, he takes over. Or he's also in the last year of his deal. I could see Sloter going, Browning being the long-term QB2 if he's good enough. We always get hyped on undrafted free agents. Last year it was Holton Hill. This year I think it's going to be Jake Browning.
For reference to, you talk about guaranteed money. For reference, Holton Hill also got less than we gave Browning last year. So, like, for reference, they're valuing pretty high, which is really weird to me.
For reference, Jake Browning's guaranteed money is the second highest quarterback on the roster, and it's 0.23% of what Kirk Cousins is guaranteed.
See, my problem with Jake Browning is his college tape was so bad, like so bad, guys. I'm sorry, he couldn't place the ball. He was so bad under pressure. Like, there were so many things that I had wrong with Jake Browning. But like, the weird part is I went after, because I heard rumors about his pro day. And like, I went and I watched his pro day online after we signed him to that ridiculous undrafted free agent contract, and he was like, the way he was throwing the ball in his pro day was so impressive. So I don't know if it's just because of his pro day that we signed him, but his tape was awful, and his pro day was like, it was like watching a different quarterback. So I don't know what's going on with Jake Browning at all. I disagree. I agree and disagree. I do think Mannion is going to be the oddball out. Just because he is, I think, the least guaranteed money of the three. And I think this is going to be the year where we do only carry 2, and maybe we carry 3 until Holton Hill comes back, because you get that extra player those first 4 weeks too. So maybe you let them battle it out for those first 4 weeks, and then you only carry 2 QBs after that once Holton Hill comes back. But I do think Sloter or whatever, I always mess up his name, is going to win the spot. But I think that Browning could be a practice squad kind of guy. Who knows? Hopefully we get the pro day Browning over the actual tape Browning, because if we get the tape Browning, I'm going to be so mad.
So this is I think an interesting point, the idea of carrying 3 quarterbacks for the first 4 weeks of the season. And then what if both Sloter and Browning do well in the preseason, so you don't know who you're going to keep. And by the 4th week of the season, we can, maybe not by the 4th week, but by about the 8th week of the season, we can probably assume that one team in the league at least is going to be hurting for like an off the street like quarterback, because it happens every year. So my question is just going to be like, when that happens, who do you keep on your roster? Do you keep Sloter, who's been there for a long time, and they're trying to develop into this at least backup quarterback, or do you keep the guy who, if he does okay or does well in preseason, he shows you one good preseason, then doesn't touch the field because we're assuming Kirk Cousins plays every single snap? Like, what do you do there? Because someone at some point is probably going to steal. It could potentially steal that guy if he does really well in preseason.
Yeah, I mean, we carried 3 quarterbacks last year with Cousins, Simeon, and Sloter. And the reason we didn't put Sloter in the practice squad was because a lot of teams wanted him. If you're on the practice squad, another team can steal them if they promote them to their 53-man roster, by the way. So there is a risk of putting someone on the practice squad. So I think because of that context, I think the team really likes Sloter. I think Sloter is still held in high regards around the league, but from, as I said before, all the offseason action, I don't think the Vikings trust him to be QB2. So I think he's locked in at QB3. The only question for me is QB2 Mannion or is it Browning? Like you said, we might be able to discern if we're getting pro day Browning or tape Browning by the end of training camp. So so hopefully, so I think at that point we're either cutting Mannion and Browning is going forward as a QB2, which is ideally what you want, or he doesn't develop and there's just not enough to feel confident in him as the second option overtaking Slaughter. And at that point, I think he goes to the practice squad. And if he's on the practice squad, he could get poached. I don't know if he necessarily does. And then we keep Mannion. So I think Slaughter's safe. And I think we're definitely carrying 3 quarterbacks. The question is really Browning or Mannion. And either of them could be off the team. Either of them could be practice squad. Or I guess, I don't know. Can Mannion join the practice squad? Is he too old or something?
He's too many years on an active roster.
Okay. So, yeah, he'd be cut. But I think, the QB2 spot is the battle. I think 1 and 3 are locked in.
Interesting. Okay, so we kind of alluded to it a little bit, and in our notes it just says long snapper ? So what do you guys think of drafting a long snapper?
I don't like it at all. There was so much value still on the board, and then I read Darren Wolfson's report that we in the undrafted free agency frenzy, we tried to get Stanley Morgan Jr. and Emmanuel Hall, and reading that just made me so much more pissed off that we went and drafted a long snapper, because why not grab one of those guys? Because I had them both rated higher than both those wide receivers that we drafted. And I think that there's part of me that thinks maybe, Rick Spielman was looked at Stanley Morgan Jr. as someone that he could sneak onto his team because his son played with him. But that didn't work out, because why would you want to go to a team that just drafted 2 wide receivers over you? And so that didn't make any sense to me. But
drafted 2 wide receivers over you, has their first 2 wide receiver spots set. Oh, and they've got 2 other guys who played wide receiver 3 last year. So,
well, I mean, I still think that wide receiver 3 spot is up for grabs, especially with Aldrick Robinson not being re-signed. But for the long snapper, everything that I've read is he's the greatest long snapper ever. And
he better be.
He the way he places the laces is exactly the same every single snap. So that's really impressive. But I mean, his biggest knock that I read on Lance Zerloin's grade of him was the fact that he was potentially not going to be able to play for 2 years. And I think that's still up in the air. Connor, you and I talked about this previously, but I don't think that it's for certain that he's going to be able to play. I think that he is going to be practicing with us, but I don't think that once the season kicks off, I don't think he's going to be able to be part of the 53. I don't know how that's going to work with a contract, and can you put him on your practice squad? I don't know how that works at all with that kind of situation, or if the contract's just delayed. I think it is interesting. A little interesting caveat is that Kevin McDermott's contract is 2 more years. So is it going to be a perfect sync up that he's going to be part of the team right after Kevin McDermott, his contract is up? I still don't like draft. But the other thing that I heard was that Denver had literally already agreed to an undrafted free agent signing of him. And we called him to see if he would want to sign with us. And he said, I've already agreed to Denver. And that's why we signed him, or that's why we drafted him.
Yeah, just for reference, there is an Air Force academy in Colorado, so I think that is where Air Force is. U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs.
Yep, so I lived in Denver for a couple years. It's really actually not that far from the Mile High Stadium either.
Yeah, it's a bit it is in Colorado Springs. It's an hour and a half or something, if that.
Yeah, I think it's more 45 minutes.
Yeah,
to an hour, something like that.
I've been to Denver 2 times.
I think there's a lot to unpack here. I don't want to go too far down the road of assuming he's not on the roster for 2 years, because I have heard some reporting that prior to the draft, Spielman was in contact with Air Force Academy, which is where he played college. And if you're part of the Air Force Academy, you have to give 2 years to service. That's what we're talking about. So I think there's some way of either a deferral of service or some way he could like serve it on site while still playing for Minnesota. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but they felt confident enough to take him. So I feel like there's some way he could do a service while playing for the Vikings. But the pick I was expecting to see there was a kicker because of Dan Bailey's contract is kind of up in the air. I think he's only on one. I think he's on the same deal that we gave to why am I blanking on his name? Who's Forbath? Yes, exactly. That we then cut for a rookie kicker. So I was expecting to see another rookie kicker, another camp battle, another cut of one of them. So I was kind of surprised that we went long snapper instead of kicker. And they're just kind of rolling with Bailey. I think maybe part of that is what you mentioned. If he's an elite long snapper and he's lining up the laces how he's supposed to, maybe that's a reason that you think, oh, maybe we'll make Dan Bailey better because the snap is good. I'm just speculating. I don't know what's going on here. Like I said, I think Browning was the target if you could get a snapper in free agency, but because I didn't have him to the Broncos.
I mean, I think you also look at the fact that I think they do want to bring in another kicker because they brought in like 4 for tryouts too.
Yeah, they brought in apparently the AAF guys.
Yeah, I think they're still on good terms with the 2 AAF guys that they brought in, which are Nick Rose and I don't remember his first name, but Koo.
Young Ho Koo.
Young Ko Koo. So I think they're on good terms with neither of them have been signed specifically by the Bears because I think they were the ones like in competition with us for all the kickers. Like every kicker that came out of the AAF had a trial with us and the Bears. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's still a chance that we bring another guy in. I think that was always a speculation with the kind of contract that Bailey did sign, and I would like to bring in a guy to compete with him. But honestly, I couldn't see Bailey losing. I think that he still has a lot of talent.
The Bears did sign. The Bears did sign Emmett Carpenter. Just as a side note from things that we've talked about in the past, was that the Bears signed Emmett Carpenter. There was speculation that like maybe he could come to the Vikings. I think they met with him, but like he decided to go to Chicago because I think he probably felt he had a better chance of making the team there. Also, just as a side note, I love Emmett Carpenter as a person. I don't think he's an NFL caliber kicker.
I can kind of see us sticking with Bailey. I just looked up his stats just to confirm because he was really good at short yardage situations and extra points, but really bad basically once you got past 40 yards. So I can see, I mean, honestly, I've kind of been advocating that kickers shouldn't be kicking these long kicks in most situations. I think if you're back behind your logo, you should punt. I think if you're within 40-yard distance, then kicking becomes an option. But I think in between like the 50 and like the 40-yard line, maybe 35, just go for it on 4th because the probability that you're going to hit a kick is low. And if you're punting, it's going to be a short punt and you're going to be losing net yardage. So it makes sense for me. Just when you're in that range, go for it. If you get a first down, that's points on the board because then you're kicking a field goal or going for a touchdown. And if you're losing it, like you're losing, 20, 30 yards on a short punt. So ideally, if I was in the Vikings coaching staff, I would say keep Bailey. You got him on lock for the short yardage. And then just every time, once you're on the opponent's side of the field, just go for it on 4th. Just what can happen? What you're not losing that much.
I've been advocating for that as well, but I think situation does matter too. If it's a 4th and 20 from your 40-yard line, like maybe don't go for that.
Yeah, also, this is all my headcanon. No NFL team has ever done this. I don't know if any are considering it. Probably most aren't. So
I mean, I think you look at the extra point argument and you add that to it. Now that that's been moved back. More teams are going for 2. So why not, when it's a long field goal, why not go for 2, essentially? You know what I'm saying? Like, go for that distance.
And I think Bailey only missed 1 extra point, so I would say even that's not long for him. It's really once you get past.
Yeah, no. He was the total opposite of Kai Forbath. Like, Kai Forbath made all his field goals but missed like all the extra points, and Dan Bailey like made all the extra points but like missed like half his field goals. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to me because I'm not on team go for it on 4th down every time. And that's a generalization of what you guys said, but I think it could work where you go for it, you know, every once in a while, or like depending on the situation. But I think in close games, especially, like those 20 to 30 yards could be like the difference in the game, especially when you're trying to play like ball control and field position, which I think is something that Zimmer is really big on playing. We've seen it before where he decides to either punt or like decides to just do something that you're like, why would you not be more aggressive in that situation? But then you think about it, it's literally he just wants to control the game, for better or for worse. I think that's just the coach that he is he's going to control field position.
Yeah. And if you look back to the Madison pick, maybe we get more of those 4th and short situations, and we just keep plotting. You get an extra 2 minutes off the clock with another set of downs. You just grind them out. You know, the other team doesn't ever get the ball back. I love that pick.
I'm pretty sure Connor is the highest on Madison of anyone I've spoken to.
This is the first time I'm saying it publicly because I know I'm going to take the heat for saying 3rd round running back is my favorite pick of the draft. But I mean, you can just tell how passionate I am about this guy.
Yeah, I think you need a Madison jersey over there.
Fans hook me up.
What number is Madison gonna wear? We'll order him a custom NFL jersey now.
I don't think that's been announced yet. I think only the top 2 picks have numbers yet. I don't know if Madison has a number.
Oh, well, he's gonna have to change it because he's got 22 in Boise. So.
Yep. Yeah, he's not gonna be able to wear that 22.
He's gonna call Harrison Smith and see if he's willing to give it to him.
Maybe he goes 25 and gets the Murray number.
Go 29. Yeah, make Rhodes give you 29. Just be Chester Taylor.
I think the last kind of talking point we had was like how many of these 12 rookies can really contribute. And prior to us starting this podcast here, I did go through and make like the earliest of early 53-man roster projection, and I think because of how top heavy this cap is, I think you are looking at a lot more rookies contributing and making the 53 than a lot of maybe other teams would be looking at, just because of how top heavy our roster is. So looking through it, I actually have 8 of our 12 rookies making the roster. And that might be a little high. I struggled between Cameron Smith making the roster or Hercules Mataafa making the roster. And right now I have Cameron Smith just because he was obviously a draft pick versus Mataafa being an undrafted free agent. So I gave him kind of that edge based off capital that was used there. But I think you're looking at 7, 8 that are actually making the roster, which is insane to me, that many can truly battle for a spot. And that's, that's not including the long snapper too. So. Because I don't know what the situation is there.
Yeah,
I'm looking potentially even 9 then if he makes the roster. So
I'm looking through the roster. I don't have any big concerns with it. I mean, some of the guys like Jordan Taylor and like Zylstra maybe at the end of camp get swapped. I think you also posted this on Twitter if people want to take a look.
I did, yes. I posted.
Okay.
I'm at Super Skull Fan. If you want to take a look at it, that's my little plug there. But for reference, the only rookies I didn't have making the roster, I did put on the practice squad as well, which are Obadiah Johnson. I don't even know how to say his name. I don't have Armand Watts making the roster right now just because of how crowded that room is. And then Marcus Epps I also have on the practice squad there. But the rest of them, I think, have a real shot at making the roster. And I think there's even a few that can really contribute day one. You look at Garrett Bradbury, obviously he's going to contribute day one. I think Irv Smith, obviously going to contribute day one. Even if he is just a third down back, you're looking at Madison making an impact from day one. Right now, the way that I'm looking at it is I actually do have Chad Beebe and Dylan Mitchell battling for that wide receiver 3 spot, kind of with Jordan Taylor in that mix too, that free agent pickup that we got. I think you're looking at Drew Samia potentially making an impact, whether even if it's just as depth and someone that can spell a guard or something during injury. And then I really think Chris Boyd is going to be that sleeper that makes some impact on the team too, whether it is due to injury or he has some return ability too, or even the impact of making sure that Holden Hill doesn't get suspended again. I think that there's a lot of players that will contribute.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question here. So 2 questions. Let's say the long snapper makes the roster. And let's say what I talked about with quarterbacks, we carry 3, which would be Cousins, Slaughter, and either Mannion or Browning. Which 2 do you think you would take off if both of those guys make it? Like, which 2 do you think are the weakest?
So I think first of all, I didn't in my roster projection, I didn't calculate someone being on the roster for the first 4 weeks. I have Holden Hill as a stay. So there's someone that someone that's not on my 53 that is going to be there for the first 4 weeks too. So that could be someone like who's ever battling for the third quarterback position. I like that idea of making him battle it out for the first 4 weeks of the season too. There's already a lot of wide receivers. We have a lot of offensive linemen. You're probably looking at someone that can have that return ability too, or someone that can contribute in other ways, excuse me, so you're looking at those guys that can contribute other ways. So if those 2 do make the roster, I think obviously if the long snapper makes the roster, you're getting rid of Kevin McDermott. So that's the easy one, sure. Easy answer there.
You mean we're not going to carry 2 long snappers?
So that extra guy, so there you automatically have an extra guy for the 4 weeks if Browning makes the roster, and then if you do want to carry 3 quarterbacks after that, you're probably looking at a defensive lineman, honestly, just because that's the where I have the most players kept at this time. So you're probably looking at someone like, unfortunately, Jalen Holmes, or again Odenigbo, or I think a sleeper that could be cut is Tashawn Bauer. That's someone that he hasn't shown us that much. In fact, I actually think that Odenigbo so far in preseason has shown us more than Bauer has. But it's not all about what's going on in preseason. There's a lot of stuff we don't see. So I think that those 2 could be battling for a roster spot as well.
All right. I think I agree with all that.
Lots to be determined by the beginning of the season. We're going to see a lot of, I think, a lot of interesting battles from rookies and second and third year guys who have only played in preseason or very little contribution during the regular season. I think we've got our starters pretty much set, other than the question of like who's shifting on the line and maybe that wide receiver 3 spot. But just real quick, I think if we can real quick do 2 things. Let's give a grade to the draft, because everybody loves the little aggregate, like, I'm going to give it a C. But like, let's do that, and then state 1 player that that we missed out on that you really think we should have gotten. I'll go first. I'll give Spielman a B+. I think essentially solving or at least getting a plan in place for what your offensive line is going to be going forward, giving yourself the offensive weapon of Irv Smith Jr. in the second round. Originally, I was down on Madison, but I think it's going to end up being a decent pick in the end.
Connor turned you.
Connor's really up on him. And yeah, I think just all around it was a solid. After that, it was a lot of solid picks that are going to be here and they're going to be available. But I don't know that there's anybody who's really going to set the world on fire out of those last few rounds, other than maybe Dylan Mitchell if he can put it together. But I'll give it a B+, and then I will say that the guy that we missed out on is, of course, Blake Cashman is going to be mine.
I'll go next. I also give it a B+. I think, my sleeper pick that I really, really like that we didn't talk about is Oli Udo. I think that I'm not even going to try his full first name, but I think he's a really good project tackle and someone that you can kind of mold. He needs work on his footwork and stuff like that, but he's just a massive human being, and he is a human mover. Like, he just moves guys, and he's a really good project tackle that I could see if he impresses enough, I actually could see him take over for someone like Riley Reif. Maybe not even next year, but down the line, I think he has that kind of potential to be our starting left tackle. He's someone that I'm really impressed with. If you're going missed out, who I'm upset about, I would have preferred us go safety a little bit earlier, and the guy that I would have wanted is Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I think he would have really fit with what we do in this defense. And I actually had him with a first round grade, and he fell, I think, to the fourth. And so that was insane to me, that the value that would have been, to be able to try to trade up for someone like him would have been amazing. And so that's the guy I'm kind of upset that we missed out on. But otherwise, I think it's a really solid draft. I think we hit all of our needs and depth issues, and this is the draft that you wanted to accumulate a lot of picks, because it was a really deep draft, and I think Rick succeeded in that.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go a bit lower than you guys. I think I'm gonna give it a B-. The main concern I think I have is, overall, we've talked about the picks individually, and I think I can find a rationale for each pick at their individual spot. But what kind of worries me is that we went so offense heavy, and every year with Zimmer, well, I guess I should start off. Defensive regression is really big in this league. Since Zimmer has been a head coach, there have been a lot of top 5 defensives that have completely fallen off. At one point, the Bengals were like a top 3 offense, not anymore. Jaguars famously recently fell off. There've been a couple other teams that have like really good seasons and then fallen off, and Zimmer has been able to maintain, I won't say elite because I haven't been top 3 every year, but very good top 10 defenses pretty much every year of his tenure. And he's been doing that because he's been reinvesting in the defense every year instead of just saying, hey, we're going to trust the same guys. There's kind of this fallacy that especially fans like to have, where we say everything that was good last year is going to stay good. So if we just fix everything that was bad, we'll be the perfect team. And as we all know, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes the things that you were good in, you're not as good in the next year. So the way I found that Zimmer has kind of staved that off is by reinvesting in the defense, continuing to get cornerbacks, even though I know everyone hates that. You get Mike Hughes last year. Before that, Mackenzie Alexander was another one. I feel like he's constantly bringing in new guys, and one of the things that Zimmer gets most credit on in DBs is not necessarily finding these low-round picks that he mines out and develops them into big stars. I'm looking through some of our draft history here. Like Jack Tocho was a 7th-round pick cornerback. He never developed into a starter, but the strength of Zimmer's coaching ability is that he takes these top round guys, round 1, round 2, and they never bust. All of them are solid or good. And that's oftentimes where teams falter, is they'll take a high round pick, invest a lot into a guy, and then he won't end up being good. So I'm kind of worried that with Zimmer on defense, you're going away from these safe defensive picks. You're not reinvesting the defense. I know we're all high on, if we can just, if our defense is the same that it was in 2018, 2017, and we improve the offense, then we get past the NFC Championship. I'm just really worried that the gains we make on offense are not going to be enough to offset the losses we take on defense, specifically the 3-tech spot. I think we've really moved a step down, missing on Sheldon Richardson. So even though I can find a rationale for all these individual picks, and I think in total I like them, I can understand why they're picking them. I think overall I'm a bit concerned. And I think honestly I might give it a C+, but the fact that they do have a plan and that they're going in all in, like I said, I would have preferred Dillard, but they want Bradbury for the immediate future. I think the fact that they have a plan, at least I'm like, okay, I'll give it a B-, but I'm worried. I'll say that.
And I think statistically, I'm just going to add a little thing to yours there, Connor. The last 3 years, I think they actually have been top 5 all 3 years statistically. Yeah. So I get what you're saying, though, that there can be that drop off. And I've been the one that's been advocating, taking a quarterback earlier. And I think if for anyone who follows me, they know I'm probably the most vocal person on Twitter right now that hasn't wanted Trey Waynes traded. So like, I don't get all that talk there. That would have been stupid. I think you can look at the cornerback talk that you had with Zimmer developing the high end and not having busts, but then you go defensive line and you look at Andre Patterson, and he is the one that gets those late round gems and makes some of these crazy good talents. So I think that there's that give and take there on the defense of Zim needs the higher draft picks, but Patterson you can give him undrafted guys and he'll make something of it.
Yeah, one last thing on corners. I completely agree with you that we shouldn't be trading Trey Waynes, but looking into 2020, we don't have Waynes on contract. We don't have Mackenzie Alexander on contract. And then we also have Holton Hill facing his issues. His suspension, even though he got released from his team on Texas for issues with marijuana, the suspension this time was PEDs, and PEDs are a lot more looked down upon in the league rules. So I put this out on Twitter when it first happened. But his first suspension is 4 games, and like you were saying, we were planning for that with the roster. But his second suspension is 10 games, and then his third suspension is like 2 years, I think it's 2 years, and then you have to ask specifically the commissioner to let you come back in. So you have to have like proof that you won't use PEDs again, and then also the testing measures. So you get 2 games your first time if it's just like if they only find an agent that's designed to cover it up. 4 times if you get busted for the actual PD, and then 6 games if it's both. But on your second time, it's 10 games no matter what. So even if he only has test positive for like a masking agent, it's still 10 games. So I think there's a lot of risk there. Even don't even consider the issues with other drugs he's had. Even the PD suspension is like, okay, this is not a guy I want to depend on as a starter. So I think you have 3 guys there that need to be replaced, and currently, we got Chris Boyd in like the 7th, but I don't think that's enough to reinvest.
And on top of Hill, I think if he gets another weed incident, I think it's 6 or 8 games too. So
I
think
facing harsher disciplines in both categories. So it's like,
yep,
just don't do it, man.
So now he's really on the edge with any and all kind of testing. And I think when he did test positive for PEDs, I think they have the right now to test him weekly for I think 2 years.
Yes.
So
I think, before it's yearly and then random, it's like 10 guys on each team get random at different intervals. But yeah, once you once you get busted, then they can take it whenever they want. So now he doesn't even get the warning that he ignored. Yep. So I mean, take that as cool.
That's just a side note about how bad you have to be at your job to be warned by the league that you're going to be tested and like still. Sorry, this is a side note of like the side of the NFL that I think some people forget about is like I'm pretty sure the league tells you exactly when they're going to test you, and you for a while. Like the only way that you can really mess up and miss the thing is if, at least the first time, is if you really aren't paying attention. So
some of the dates are set in the CBA, which was signed in like 2011. So there's really no excuse. I mean, like even if you want to,
Unless you're drinking kombucha, right?
yeah,
You gotta drink. He was drinking gallon upon gallon of kombucha. All right. All right. I think that's gonna do it for us here. Oh, real quick, Connor, grade
Yes.
on the Alexander Madison pick. What grade you giving it?
I'm giving that one A+. That one earns extra credit in my book.
It's the only thing that kept Spielman from failing in
You
his
get
eyes.
you get the little golden star sticker that says like "Great job." I put that on the round 3 pick.
Maybe when we go for a training camp, we'll have a gold star sticker in case we see Spielman. You can like
There we go. I'll give it to him.
give it to him.
or would you give it to Madison?
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
I'm gonna get. He gets the big cardboard sign with like his face on it, and then the gold star is that line.
But
I'm
it's
holding
gonna
that
be
in the
like, but it's gonna be like his face as Connor has drawn it in crayon.
There you go. It's more meaningful that way.
All right. So this has been another.
I gotta go see Endgame, so that's why
Yeah.
I'm out.
All right. Have
So
fun.
yeah, this has been another Vikes the Round Table. That's Ian, Paraguay, like the country, Super Skull
Sam.
fan on Twitter. Connor, thank you for being here. Connor
Thanks
Wickland,
again for hosting.
editor extraordinaire on Purple PTSD and Vikings Territory. You're on Twitter at Connor Wickland. Is that? It's just Connor
Yes,
Wickland?
it's just my name. It's Connor with an E, so CNNER.
I got a funny story about that after we get off here. But
Okay.
I am Kirby O'Connor. O'Connor with an OR at the end. You can find me on Twitter at KJOcon14. 14. This has been Vikes of the Round Table. Skull.
Skull.
Skull.